Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission podcast. My name is Rebecca Twomey, and we are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through this wild life and with your relationship with Yahweh. We are currently in a series called God's Design for Women's Health. If you're tuning in for the very first time, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Today, we are welcoming a very special guest to share her story. And I have to preface this. It is such an incredible testimony. Lindsay holds a Master of Social Work from the University of Buffalo and is living, breathing proof that facts and real science can change even the most radical, angry leftist. Her quote, Lindsay considers herself a recovered radical feminist who changed her views of the world and politics through meaningful conversations and firsthand experiences of leftist ideology in action. Having earned her master's degree in social work, she hopes to use the tenets of the profession in her everyday life to foster important conversations, just like this one, and she invites others to challenge their beliefs. During her time as a social worker, Lindsay has worked with youth in multiple settings, such as in-home, community, and schools. And Lindsay's experiences as a social work intern at Planned Parenthood is what brings her here today. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for letting me come on and share my story. I'm so excited.
Me too. I am really looking forward to you sharing your story. I'll give a little background for those listening. Lindsay and I met on Instagram when I came across a video about what happens during an abortion. And Lindsay was in the comments and she bravely shared a very brief version of her experience working at Planned Parenthood. And we got to talking. And I'm just so grateful for your willingness to come and share your story. So I'd love if you could just start off by sharing a little bit about your background and what was your upbringing like?
Yeah, so my upbringing, I'll say it was pretty chaotic. Um, my mom and my dad, we were, I would say, around like middle class. I went to public school. We were not involved in church at all, so I didn't really have that as part of my upbringing. Um, and reading this question and thinking back on my childhood, I realized that my mom had a lot of issues that surfaced in my teen years that made parenting very difficult for her. And later in life, I realized that before she had me, she lost two children.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's very sad, but I think that that kind of sets the tone for what we're going to talk about, and that experience for her definitely had such a profound impact on the trajectory of her life and everything.
Mm.
So after public school, I ended up going to a Franciscan college in Hamburg, New York, called Hilbert. And that's when I realized I wanted to be a social worker, talking to the professors and everything. I was like, this is my calling. Like, I definitely wanted to go into the helping field. And I applied to UB to get my MSW. I got into the program. I was there for 2 years at first, and then I took a break, and then I finished my master's program kind of right when COVID started. So around 2020 is when I graduated.
Perfect time to graduate, huh?
Yeah.
Wild times. So I'm curious about you feeling called to social work. Was there any particular incident that made you feel, I want to go into social work? Was there something that happened, or it just was a feeling that you knew you could help other people through that?
So I think, like I mentioned with my upbringing, I talked a lot to the school social workers, and they really helped me,
Mm.
during difficult times in my life when I was in high school. And I thought, wow, it would be so cool to like be that adult for, children, whether it was in a school setting or just a community setting, to be kind of like a guidance, you know, through this life that is so crazy, especially when you're in high school. I mean, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
that is kind of what really made me think like, I want to get into the helping profession. I want to help people, which I think everyone says when they go into that field.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of what led me to there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I have to touch on this. You mentioned leftist feminist movement and kind of termed it that way. What attracted you to that movement? Was it something that you kind of feel like you always were a part of or chose to be a part of as you got older? Tell me about your background with that.
So I would say in undergrad is when it was something that I realized I wanted to become a part of. I would say in like junior year of undergrad, I had to take some classes like senior seminar, or not senior seminar, junior symposium, where we had to get a subscription to the New York Times, and every week we would read an article and discuss like the politics about it, the social aspects of it, and it would just be like an open discussion. And that's where I started hearing um, about feminism, and then about um, racism, racial inequality, all, classism, all of those different kind of buzzwords were coming up during classes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm in the helping field. I'm trying to be like a champion for these people that are like so oppressed. And so um, I need to like get on board with that. And, the feminist movement. And another part of it, I think, was like the whole sticking it to the man. Because, when you're like in your late teens, early 20s, that's kind of like the big, um, drive for that time. Like, they're like making a change, going to rallies, you're talking about really serious issues in like a classroom setting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think a lot of the professors, especially for my specific field, were in that movement as well. Um, and I'm sure that there was some kind of trickle down
Sure.
effect that definitely happened.
Yeah, for sure. I was an English major in college, and so in liberal arts, as I'm sure in social work, it's a whole thing. There are whole groups, so I understand where you're coming from in that perspective of just it's part of the culture in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that even for me, I remember specific weeks where there were questions posed to us that I mean, I'm 15 plus years out of college and I still remember. And to this day go, interesting that they were kind of propagandizing certain trajectories, right? So I'm curious because you're much fresher out of this. What did feminism or what does feminism mean in those circles and in those groups for you? What did being a feminist mean to you?
During that time, it meant, gaining power of my own body, which I think ties into the whole like, abortion topic.
Mhm.
Being able to do what you want, like men can't tell you to do anything, smash the patriarchy, all of that, the key slogans that they talk about. Um, and at that time, it meant like women, and not even being equal, but being superior to men.
Mm,
And I think that that was a message that was kind of hidden. I
mhm.
remember that there were some men in the classroom, like during my senior year, that were like asking questions like, what is feminism about? And they said, like, being a straight white male, I feel like I'm targeted when I've never done anything.
Mm.
And I thought that at the time I was like, well, they shouldn't be talking or saying anything. But now it's like, well, yeah, of course they probably did feel targeted.
Yeah,
Um, so that was what it meant, at the time for me to be like a feminist.
that's interesting. And if you think about that from the flip side, if you had been in a room and men were talking about, well, men should control things and men need to be the bosses over all women and all that. Could you imagine how uncomfortable you'd be in that same scenario from the flip side of it? It is interesting when we think about it from that other side.
It is, especially like hindsight is definitely 2020. Like thinking now, it's like I feel so bad for those, college kids that were probably just like, I'm trying to get an education and to just try to get through college, and I'm like the bad person.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what about the pro-choice side of things? Obviously, this is going to be a huge part of your experience that you're going to share today. What made you feel like pro-choice was the right choice for you at that time?
Again, but going back to having power over my own body, the whole bodily autonomy thing. Um, and that kind of went hand in hand with what I wanted for my career. I wanted to, be a social worker, go into that profession. Um, and social work is all about empowering clients to make informed choices, make their own decisions. Keyword being informed, because we weren't entirely informed in certain aspects during, the social work field. And even like day-to-day stuff, like with the whole Planned Parenthood thing, they're not informing them about exactly what they're going to be going into when they walk into that clinic. So that was really what it was for me.
Mhm.
Not telling someone else what to do. Like at the time, I don't know if I had gotten pregnant in undergrad, if I would have gone through with that, because since I was still like uh for being your own person, being able to do whatever you wanted to do, I just didn't want to tell anyone else what to do with their own body.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you feel like at that time in college, women that were a part of the pro-choice movement, do you think they really understood what it means to have an abortion? What really happens during an abortion? Or do you feel that there is a good understanding, and even with that understanding, it doesn't matter. They just want to make the choice whether to abort or not? I'm just curious. This is my own curiosity.
I would say they don't know, because I didn't know going into like being an intern at Planned Parenthood. I had no idea what it entailed. I just heard what other people would say, it's a
Mhm.
clump of cells, it's going to be, an easy procedure, it's going to be normal, um, that type of thing. And then after I realized like what exactly an abortion procedure entailed, I was like, I've I've been lied to
Mm,
like my whole life about this.
mm,
But I do think there are some people that know what it is and know the procedure and know what it looks like. Um, I don't know if they just don't care, or if, like you said, they just want to be able to make that choice for themselves
mhm,
of, yes, I know what this entails and I'm going to do it.
mhm. Yeah, and we're gonna get into kind of the details of what you experienced, but it reminds me of I once read a comment from a thread similar to the one that you and I were on, and maybe even in the same one, where someone said something like, "Well, this isn't entirely accurate because when I had an abortion, they killed the fetus first before removing it." And it just like my heart sank because to me it was like both instances, whether the child was killed before or after, what at whatever point during the procedure, it just spoke to the fact that she used the word kill. Felt
Mhm.
made me feel very like you understand that something is being killed here, a human being. But we're going to get into that. So I love, could you tell us a little bit about what led you to interning at Planned Parenthood and then what happened? What was your experience?
So I initially wanted to intern when I was an undergrad. I went to, like I said, a Franciscan college, and when I suggested that one, because you have to do two internships. One internship, I wanted to go to Planned Parenthood, and they did not. They were like, "No, you can't do that." So when I went to UB, I suggested to, they're called field educators. So I said, I see that Planned Parenthood is in here. I think that a social worker in the clinic or wherever in Planned Parenthood would be really beneficial. Um, So it wasn't part of the program until I brought it up, and then they kind of made that like section for me. I guess it was like a pilot thing for a social worker intern to be at Planned Parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of like free range to do not really anything I wanted, but I could be everywhere. I was in clinics. I was in there's like a youth program there, where like after school it's like based around theater and also learning about like education, like sexual education, stuff like that. Um, so I was in that. I went to the call center that's over in Rochester, which was really interesting, where all the calls will come in and they kind of get triaged, or people will have questions because you can't directly call the clinic
Mm-hmm.
as easily. So I did that. There was a mobile, like a big RV that would go to different schools and they would provide reproductive care, quote unquote. Mainly it was like STI, STD testing. Um, so there was that. And then I was at the surgical clinic, which that is a place where women will go and get surgical abortions if it was too far along for a medical abortion.
Okay.
It was only like one time a week, or not a week, one time a month, that they would do this.
Wow. Okay.
And that was where I essentially realized that this was not for me, as far as like being at Planned Parenthood and, you know, being someone that is pro-choice. So I still remember to this day, like walking into the clinic, and there was a girl that was working there, and she had a shirt on that said, "Abortion is a gift from God." Mm-hmm.
What?
And that was a shirt she wore in the clinic. Like people could see her, people who are coming in during a very difficult time, who are like, okay, I have to get this abortion, or feeling like they have to. And that is the attire that she chose to wear, which I ended
Oh
up
my.
like talking about later with my supervisor. So that was like the first kind of like taste I had of what that day was going to be like.
Wow.
So I met with some of the uh, women who were there, like before they do the procedure, you have to sign off paperwork. So I met with them, um, and kind of shadowed while the nurse went over the paperwork with them, gave them medication to calm their nerves, essentially like painkillers. Some of them were prescribed volume, I think,
Okay.
and just getting them ready for this is what you're going to be doing.
What is the
Um,
paperwork for? Just stating their risks, or does it tell them, or do the women even read it? Or do they just sign it and move on?
Sometimes they didn't even read it. The nurse would like go over like this is like a consent form, essentially, that you're consenting to that you're going to be getting an abortion.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think I watched any of the girls actually sit there and read what they were
Yeah.
signing.
Because there's
And
risk
then
associated, right? Like you could perforate your uterus or cause other damage. And I'm sure most women probably, like when we go to any appointment, just sign at the bottom.
right, yeah, not really knowing, and that goes back to the whole informed consent thing, not knowing what you're going to entail, what the risks are,
Hmm.
um, which is really sad when you think about it, because like potentially like someone, you know, having something like that happen during an abortion and then it escalating to needing an ambulance or something.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know. It was just kind of wild that
Do they
none of them.
explain what they're doing during the procedure, or how do they explain what's going to happen during the procedure?
So they do that once they're already in the room.
Okay.
Um, and I remember the uh, abortionist was mentioning, you know, that you're going to feel some gentle suctioning, but it sounds like, you know, how when you go to a dentist and they try to, they rinse out your mouth and they're getting all like the fluid out of your mouth with a little
Mm.
suction thing, that's what
Mhm.
it sounded like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you could see, because I was in the room, you could see that she was obviously in pain, and it wasn't gentle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they do talk them through what they're doing. Um, the woman saying, I'm going to be dilating the uterus with these different like long tools that they have to do, and then suctioning out what's inside the uterus, which is a baby.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But that's not what they
and
say, right?
no,
Do they use fetus, or do they just say like contents, or
I can't remember exactly what the verbiage was because I was kind of shocked,
I'm sure. I'm sure.
seeing it, seeing exactly what it was. I remember my supervisor at the time was right next to the woman and like holding her hand and everything, which I thought, I mean, how much bedside manner can you have during a situation like that? Um, but it was very quick, and then they um, take the contents of what comes out, and it's in a bag, and it's immediately taken out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards, they tell the woman who's laying there, you're going to be bleeding for a while. We're going to put you in our recovery room, and you're going to be there for like a couple hours until you can walk and you feel better, and then you can go home. Um, and then after all that was done and she was in the recovery room, the girl that had the t-shirt on that I mentioned earlier and another staff member were like almost giddy to see I'm going to call it the baby afterwards. And they were just talking about how cool it looked and like, oh, I love looking at um medical stuff, and just like talking about it like they were seeing like, I don't know, something completely different
Mm-hmm.
given like the circumstances. I don't know. It was just like
It's like they were looking
bizarre.
at fossils from a museum or something, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. Like they were so like stoked about it. And
Yet
then
it
I
was a
asked,
living, breathing baby not long before. And now I'd like to hear a little bit about the timing, because you mentioned that these are abortions that are past the point where they're giving medication. So how many weeks gestation was this baby? And how many weeks gestation would some of the other babies would have been during this day?
I want to say this one specifically was, I don't know why 17 weeks sounds like the right number, because I remember asking at some point like, am I allowed to see
Mhm,
it?
mhm, mhm,
Because I wanted to get the full experience, and I know that might be like a bad, like, I probably shouldn't have asked to see it, but I wanted to know what
mhm.
it looked like.
Okay.
And she said, I don't know if you should. It was pretty far along.
Wow.
And I was like, I've seen like, I've hunted before, like it's fine. Like I did not really think anything of it. And I went into the back room and I was by myself, and you see this baby in a Pyrex dish. And during that moment, I was like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
Before if you're getting like a medication abortion, I believe it has to be, I want to say under 12 weeks,
Mhm.
um, that you can get one. And at that time, they say that you're going to pass something that's a clot the size of a lemon. But I'm sure that you've seen, people on, Instagram or TikTok say like you're not just passing a clot, you're passing an actual child. Like it's a baby that's
Yes.
coming out.
Yes, absolutely. I have had two miscarriages myself, and they've both been very early miscarriages, around 5 to 6 weeks. And your body goes through labor at 5 to
Mm-hmm.
6 weeks. So I could only imagine a baby at 17 weeks, a mother would have gone through labor had she had a miscarriage at 17 weeks. And that's a very large size baby. That must have been very difficult for you to see.
It was, and I thought, by like the how the other two coworkers were taught or people were talking about it, I was like, oh, I'll be fine. Like it's not going to affect me. It's just a medical procedure. I'll be okay. And I was totally not like okay after I saw that.
Yeah.
That is definitely the moment that changed my entire perspective on abortion. Um,
Yeah. Tell us about that. What changed after that moment for you?
I just realized like that more it became more clear to me that I've been lied by the leftists and the feminists of it's just a clump of cells. It's not an actual baby. Like this isn't murder. And I realized that at that time, like that was murder. Like I watched someone in the name of bodily autonomy and
Mm.
empowerment murder their child because they felt like it was the right decision for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's so heartbreaking for that mother who was swayed into that, first of all. And I'm sure that being in the field that you're in, you've probably also come across a lot of the residual trauma that comes from abortion. And that's something that isn't talked about. Abortion is praised in communities as being a woman's choice. It's a woman's choice to kill the baby inside of her. Yet there isn't the same rallying around the women who have been coaxed into this experience and then now have to deal with the after effects because you just had a baby.
Mm-hmm.
Even though this baby was removed from you by a doctor, she's now going to go through all of the postpartum hormones that come along with the baby now not being in her body. And I just think about how heartbreaking that must be for so many of these women that were convinced that, this was the right thing to do for your career or for your life. Your life would have been ruined or whatever the case might be. It's just a heartbreaking thing. And I really thank you for sharing this story with us because I know how important it is for us to talk about as a society. Because, like you said, there are movements that are pushing the other side and pushing that other agenda so hard. And the truth of the matter is that these are children, human children, that are being destroyed for convenience, and of course, there's always the argument of, well, what about the cases of rape or the cases of incest or the cases of this? And now I'm going to share my own personal opinion on this. This is, podcast that I'm running here. It's my opinion. My answer to those comments would be, how does murder fix any of that? How does murder solve the original crime that happened? It doesn't. It doesn't solve the problem. If anything, you're creating additional trauma on top of it. So again, personal opinion here, but it really is just it's a heartbreaking thing to watch. I really am grateful for liveaction.org, which is an Instagram page on, well, they're also on Facebook and YouTube. I'm really grateful that they have been exposing the actual procedures over the last few years because I think that people are so numb to what actually happens during an abortion because there are
Mm-hmm.
words that are used that say, like you mentioned earlier, a clump of cells. Oh, it's just a little bit of tissue. And I can tell you, I saw the baby that came out of me that was only 5 weeks old. It was the size of a grain of rice and it had already begun to form. It had a little head, little ears, little nose at 5 weeks. And I can only imagine at 17 weeks or even beyond these late term abortions that people are getting right before the baby's about to be born. I'm a part of a Facebook group called 22 Matters, and it is a group for women whose babies come at 22 weeks. and are born in NICUs, and these babies live at 22, 23, 24, 25 weeks. So to think about a baby at 17 weeks, just a month later, would have been supported in certain hospitals. Of course, not all are going to support a micro preemie like that. But it's such a heartbreaking, it's heartbreaking where our society has gone, this path that they've gone down. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about the spiritual side of this, and kind of, it's interesting, the shirt that you mentioned that the woman was wearing that mentions God, because God is not, it doesn't have anything to do with supporting abortion. I can tell you that right now. If anything, God abhors abortion. He would never support the murder of human life. And it is only darkness that is supporting that industry, in my opinion. So tell me a little bit about your experience with God in this, because you had mentioned you didn't grow up going to church, and you didn't really grow up around, this kind of information about God or Jesus necessarily. So what happened after this?
So after this, I kind of started thinking, like, if this is being if this is something that I was lied to about, what else am I being lied to about? Um, from everything from religion to, critical race theory, to all of like the leftist ideologies that are pushed. And I started to question, like, why did I feel so empty and like disgusted when I saw that baby? Like, is it God? Is it, what exactly brought out those emotions? And throughout my whole, uh, I guess, college experience, I've had people ask me, field educators, professors, like, ask me about my relationship with God, which I think is really interesting. Even now, like, I'm not in a profession like the social work profession, I still have people asking me that.
Mm.
Um, so I think that just tells me that has put me in these situations. I don't know if to reach me, or that he has like a bigger meaning than I can even understand.
Mm.
Um, but it really just got me thinking about all the other things that I've potentially been lied to, and kind of looking on the flip side of what I had believed for years. And it opened my eyes to, maybe there is a God, maybe there is um, clearly evil out there. That whole experience at Planned Parenthood really confirmed for me that there is evil in this world. Um, so then that means there has to be good, right?
Mm.
Um, and that kind of led me to the place where I am now, where I do believe in God. I believe that um, Jesus was real and everything about, that. See, I'm not very well versed in religion and the Bible and stuff like that. I'm very, in my infancy stages of that, but
Mm.
it's definitely just changed my perspective on not even just the religious aspect of abortion, but um the scientific aspect of it.
Mhm. That's beautiful. And we'll have to talk more about some stuff, and I'll give you some resources, because it's beautiful. I love the journey that you're on. I'm so glad that the Lord has touched your life. And I do agree with you that sometimes He puts us in situations that are hard or challenging. And I really feel like it's Him opening our eyes and
Mhm.
dropping the veil that we might have between us and the world, and what the world is trying to sell us, and then what He's really trying to tell us this entire time, that maybe we just don't want to listen, we don't hear it, or perhaps we haven't been exposed to Him and His presence yet. So I think that you've got some beautiful things to come, sister. I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
Now, I would love if you would just, what do you want to share with listeners about the feminist movement and about abortion? What would you want to tell other people that might be sucked into either of those areas or curious about them?
So with the feminist movement, I mentioned earlier before how it's kind of positioned as having control over your body, control over what you can do with your life. And I guess I want to have people that are sucked into it ask themselves, how much control do you really have? And for example, like the women or the young girls who are doing things that feel maybe good in the moment, um, not really thinking through some of the things that they're doing, whether it's like going out and partying or, you know, having relations with other people in a way that's not serious. Um, really think about who is controlling you in this situation. Is it you? Because that, I mean, it could very well could be. And to that, I mean, it is what it is. Um, or is it what society is telling you to believe in? Um, the women who feel like, oh, well, I have control over my body, so I'm going to go and sleep with whoever I want. I'm going to do whatever I want. And then not realizing that there are going to be consequences for those actions.
Mhm.
And I think of a scenario of a woman going out, living it up in her 20s, maybe late 20s, sleeping with whoever she wants, and then she finds that she ends up getting pregnant. And thinking to herself, whether, oh, well, I can just go and get an abortion.
Mhm.
And is that truly having control? Or are you spiraling and you're letting other people have control? The guy who you slept with, and he has control over whatever he wanted to do for you, and now he's nowhere in sight. Or any type of situation like that. Um, and of course, for like the instance with um, rape, incest, that kind of things. Like I agree with like what you mentioned before. Murder doesn't solve the crime that's already been done, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that that is definitely the biggest thing I want to get people to ask themselves is if they are really in control being a feminist. Um,
That's
and
a
as
great
far as
point. Yeah, that's totally a great point. We all are programmed in some way about some things and many things, right? And that is a programming to this generation and the last two, I would say,
Mhm.
that's culturally and formed by the world and pushed on us by the world. It obviously is not of God or of the Lord because he specifically says to love one another and not to murder and to be fruitful and multiply, and that the bond between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, is the most beautiful union that you could imagine. And I didn't fully understand this until I was married and had children of my own, that the intimacy that exists between a husband and a wife is just, it's the most, it's not even explainable. It's the most beautiful thing that you could have. And for us to be sold this lie as young women that sleeping around is empowerment and giving our body to any man just for fun, that is the opposite of empowerment. And I can tell you there's so many women who regret those years of their lives that they gave themselves to someone else, created another human being, killed the human being because it didn't fit into that lifestyle. But the thing that's just amazing and beautiful about the Lord is that there is redemption for all of us. That these things, they do not define the love that God has for us. So this is in no way a judgment. If you're listening today and you've been down this road of abortion, I'm sure that you know how painful it was for you. And this is not a judgment call to you being influenced by the world. This is a wake-up call for all of us to say, who are you following and why? And like you said, who really holds the power? Is it you who's making these choices, or are you making these choices due to the influences around you? It's like when we're kids and we play with our neighbor friends, and there's neighbor kids, and some of them are good, and then there's always that bad kid. And the bad kid always influence us is to do something that we shouldn't do, whether it's, jump off our second story porch or worse. And that's how I think about abortion. Is it's just that bad kid, it's that bad influence that is influencing you to believe something that has the most huge, ginormous significance in life and is not something that you can undo. So, thank you for sharing that perspective. I really think that that's an important point to share. Is it really empowerment?
Mm-hmm.
Are you empowered, or are you fooled by society and being programmed to believe a certain way? And it actually goes back to the word bodily autonomy is used to say, like, oh, well, we make our own decisions. But to what extent? Because it's not your body as a woman, it's not our bodies that we're making a decision about. It's the baby's body.
Mm-hmm.
Whose bodily autonomy are we talking about here? The baby's bodily autonomy, not ours. And anyway, it's just something I wanted to add on to that. And, I'd really love to also ask what this experience taught you about God's design for women's bodies and about God, if you have something else to share.
So women are made to have babies, obviously. It's physically and it's in our DNA. We are more caring, we're more empathic, and are more nurturing than men. And I think that is such a beautiful thing. And I really think that that should be celebrated. We've talked a lot about like some evil things, today, but at the end of the day, I think that that is just a beautiful thing that God created. The women being able to reproduce and put out new life into the world. I don't have children of my own. I've never been pregnant, anything like that. But I can't wait to experience that because I know it's going to be something that I've never felt before, is bringing a life into this world. Um, I'm not sure if you follow Ballerina Farm.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yes.
but how she talked about when she felt most empowered at, like, I think it was like the Miss World
Hmm.
pageant. And she said, I felt it 7 times every time I've brought life into this world. And I'm like, that is such true empowerment.
It is.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that she's a spokesperson for mothers right now. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And if you don't know who that is, definitely check her out on Instagram, Ballerina Farms, or is it might be Singular Farm. You'll find her. She won Mrs. America and then went to Mrs. Universe. And she is a beacon for mothers in support of. She's a home birther. She births those babies in her own bedroom, which is I'm a big fan of. That's what I do too. And I can't wait for you to experience this one day, Lindsay. You're just gonna be like, this is the most beautiful, amazing thing ever. I just know it. Is there anything else that you would like to pass along to listeners, or is there anything that we can be praying for?
For passing on to listeners, I want people to, I don't want to say question their beliefs, but maybe I'll go with that. Um, to see how genuine they are and where they're really coming from. Whether, I guess, on either side, whether you're coming from just, oh, well, I hear this through the grapevine, so I hear those buzzwords and I'm about those buzzwords, so I'm going to believe it too, like with the feminist movement, or, um, on the opposite side, of that. You know, coming from a place of judgment, like you mentioned before, like judging people who maybe have had an abortion or who have slept around or whatever, not coming from a place of judgment, and
Yeah.
challenging, should we really be judging? Why don't we give them some grace?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I think, challenging those beliefs and seeing where they actually come from and following where they are coming from. I think
Hmm.
that's something I want out there. And then just praying for better days. I think we're in a very interesting time, which I would not think I'd be saying after, 2020 and what happened within that year.
Hmm.
But just praying for some better days, whatever
Yeah.
that means.
Well, the good news is Jesus is our Lord and our Savior, and we know him. So that is a beautiful thing. And if you don't know him and you're listening, you can get to know him at any time. It's all about that personal relationship with him. I am very much, it's not about going to church or, following rules, certain specific rules. It's about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and with God or Yahweh, and he will guide your path. So definitely I want to encourage listeners to seek him in all things and seek his guidance and just pray, ask for discernment, ask him to guide you, and he will, most certainly. Lindsay, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your testimony with us.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Awesome. And thank you for tuning in and for being on this journey with us. If you would like to follow along outside the podcast, be sure to join the mission on Instagram and Facebook at The Radiant Mission, or you can also watch this in video format on YouTube if you aren't already. Today we're going to close with Romans 10, verse 13. For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.